and welcome to another Top 5 board gaming video. Today I'm going to be doing games that are about other games. Now what does that mean? Well, this essentially means that I'm going to be talking about board games that were originally, when they were first published, they came out as some other type of game. Whether it's based off of a video game or a tabletop RPG or a game that's simply about playing games, whatever it happens to be, we're going super meta with the whole thing. It's going to be awesome, right? It's going to be a ton of fun. I hope that you guys enjoy it, but essentially you'll see a couple of repeats in terms of a previous video that I did where I talked about the top 5 intellectual properties that really didn't need a board game but still got one. You'll see some of those here, but a pretty good portion of them are actually new. So either way, without further ado, I'll go ahead and get started with my number 5. At number 5, I've got a game that without a doubt is the most meta of this entire list. It is Video Game High School. Now, Video Game High School, the actual tagline for it is a board game about playing video games, which is actually based off of a YouTube show, and it's just a big giant mess, all sorts of craziness. But either way, it's actually a pretty fun game. The idea behind this is that you've got different categories that you can work in, where you've got like first-person shooters, and you've got RPGs, and you've got racing games and stuff like that. And it's actually a worker placement game where you put your tokens on there and you do whatever the actions are and stuff like that. And just like any good video game, you're trying to get the high score. So it's probably the most meta thing on this list, where not only is this a game about games, but this is a board game that I'm talking about on a list about games that are about games, and this particular game is about a high school where you major in playing games. Blah. I know, even the doctor's head would explode at that much meta. But either way, it's actually a pretty decent game. It's not great, but for the purpose of this list, it's absolutely perfect. And if you're a fan of video games, or if you're a fan of the show, I think they do videos. I don't remember if it's just a comic. I apologize. It's been a long time since I looked at it. But if you're a fan, then definitely give it a try, because you'll certainly recognize a lot of the different stuff with it. And in the end, it's a pretty decent worker placement game, so you'll probably have a reasonable time with it. But regardless, Video Game High School, my number 5 game about games. At number 4, I've got a game that's a little bit more traditional in the sense that this is literally a game that is adapted from another game. Now, the thing is that this, in and of itself, could practically be its own category. But regardless, the game itself is Dungeons & Dragons. For those of you who see my videos before, you know the one that I own is The Legend of Drizzt. You also have Castle Ravenloft, you have The Wrath of Ashelon, the big dragon, evil dragon. And then you also have Lords of Waterdeep, which is based off of the D&D lore as well. So all really good board games. These are really good tile building games in this case. Lords of Waterdeep is a really pretty in-depth strategy game that's actually a lot of fun. But either way, Legend of Drizzt is the one that I have. And again, Dungeons & Dragons very famously started off as a tabletop RPG. For the longest time, it was the tabletop RPG. And it's just the game itself, the tabletop RPG, is really fun, and the board games in general do a pretty good job of recreating that, which isn't necessarily required to have a game like this, but in the end, these are games that are about games. You know, the lore is there from the original thing. For example, The Legend of Drizzt himself, Drizzt is an actual hero within the Dungeons & Dragons lore, and his story is a very, very famous one that people retell and tell and retell and all that good stuff, because long story short, he's of the race, the Drow, the Dark Elves, that really wasn't supposed to be heroic. And then, lo and behold, here is this dual-wielding ranger drow who goes and essentially saves the world. pretty much. It's a cool story. But either way, lots of fun. Definitely in the category of games about games, because not only does it really faithfully recreate the feeling of playing the game, but by and large, people will recognize Dungeons & Dragons as a tabletop role-playing game, and not necessarily as a board game, unless you've only played the board game. But either way, the Dungeons & Dragons collective set of board games are my number 4. At number 3, I've got a game that unfortunately I don't actually own, but I've talked about it a couple of times. The board game itself is XCOM Enemy Unknown, which is obviously based off of the video game of the same name. XCOM Enemy Unknown as a video game is a tactical shooter. The idea is that if you've ever played Advance Wars or Fire Emblem, or if you're old like me and you played Vanguard Bandits, which was one of my favorite games growing up, then you know what I'm talking about. You select a unit, move them, and then you can shoot, fire, all that kind of stuff. You've got to take advantage of cover, you've got, percentages to hit, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. And it's really a lot of fun. It's a really cool game. It's actually based off of some older games from the 90s that were, I want to say, UFO Enemy Unknown and then XCOM. And they were two separate games that just sort of got mashed together. But either way, XCOM Enemy Unknown, the board game, is relatively unique in the sense that it actually runs off of an app. That you can run off of a phone, tablet, whatever it happens to be. And the idea is that it actually gives you a timer, and it also gives you random events that you have to respond to, which is really, really cool and very, very faithful to the video game as well. That is to say, the more modern video game, not the original 90s one, where the whole point was that you've got random UFO attacks that do all sorts of different stuff, whether they're trying to abduct people from different locations, if they're just trying to terrorize the population, whatever it is. And you've got to deal with it in the board game as well. It's really cool. It's very cooperative, naturally. And you've got different roles that each person has to fill. So you've got the scientist, you've got the commander, you've got I believe you've got the engineer as well. And the commander is in charge of distributing the funds so that people can try to do whatever they need to do, and you just go by the app of what it is that you need to do at what time. It's very fast-paced, very chaotic, but it's a ton of fun, and again, really does a good job of faithfully recreating the experience of playing Enemy Unknown. So it's a great game, both the video and the board game. Higher up on the list simply because I think the board game is a little bit more of a faithful adaptation than, for example, some of the D&D stuff. But either way, great game. I highly advise you to try out both of them because they are really fun. XCOM Enemy Unknown, my number 3. I will tell you right now in advance that number 2 and number 1 are both tabletop RPG games that were sort of rolled into the whole board gaming thing. At number 2, I've got Shadowrun Crossfire. The reason that this is higher up on the list is mainly because this is actually already in multiple games. Now, Dungeons & Dragons, you've got Baldur's Gate, you've got Neverwinter, all that kind of stuff. Absolutely. But with Shadowrun Crossfire, I absolutely love Shadowrun Returns. It is one of my favorite little RPG games to play, and it is tremendously good at really getting you into the whole Shadowrun world. Now, the Shadowrun RPG itself is a great RPG. It's what's called cyberpunk. Think steampunk, but instead of steam-powered stuff, you've got, cybernetic implants, is essentially the way that the game goes. It's really kind of a dark game where, it's like seedy underbelly all over the place type of thing, but it's so much fun. You've got a lot of different options for character creation, just like with everything else. And the video game really faithfully recreates that. And Shadowrun Crossfire is actually a deck building game of all things, which I know is a little bit random, but it really does have that good feeling, and especially because, you know, you think of going out fighting bad guys in tabletop role-playing games that you really don't know what you're going to get. Only the person in charge, the GM or the DM, whatever you want to call them, knows what you're going to get. It's the same thing for this game. You know, you just randomly draw, and whatever you get is what you get. So it's absolutely a ton of fun. You've got a lot of cool roles where, you know, you use a lot of the colloquial terms for certain roles. For example, the face is the person who has the really high charisma and is able to talk to people. You know, that kind of thing. It's just, it's really, really cool. And again, extremely faithful recreation of both the tabletop as well as the video game experience. For me, I put this higher up on the list than D&D, which does have that same sort of idea, simply because I think there's a little bit more of a disconnect with the D&D things than there is with Shadowrun. I think that these meld a lot better within and amongst themselves, particularly with regard to the video game. But with the deck building game, you know, the pure randomness of everything. I mean, yeah, you got tile exploration and that kind of stuff with D&D, but I prefer this style of game for a tabletop RPG. It feels a little bit more fluid and organic and things like that. And not only that, but comparatively easier to add on to. But overall, a great game, a ton of fun. Shadowrun Crossfire specifically is my number 2 game about a game. Number 1 is actually a very, very interesting story, and a big part of it is the reason that it's number 1. This is another thing that is extremely meta, but in this case, it's meta because it actually started out as a game that was basically copying another game. That game got additional games, and then the game that copied it, the one I'm talking about, got a whole bunch of additional games, and actually blew a lot of the original game out of the water. The game that I'm talking about is Pathfinder. In this case, I've got the Rise of the Rune Lords base set for the adventure card game. And for those of you who don't know, Pathfinder really originally was essentially a rip-off of D&D. That's a lot of how it started. Now, since then, they have really diverged and very much become their own entities. But when it first started, I mean, the D&D was really the direct competition, so a lot of Pathfinder's mechanics come directly from D&D. So it's a game that was already based off of another game, and then Pathfinder came out with, again, this is a deck building game very similar to Shadowrun Crossfire. And the thing is that Pathfinder, to my knowledge at least, doesn't really have any video games, I don't believe. But the thing is, the vastness of the deck building game is absolutely incredible. Again, I here have the Rise of the Rune Lords base set, but even within Rise of the Rune Lords, you've got adventure decks that send you off to different locations, fighting different monsters, all that kind of stuff. And then there are multiple base decks as well, or base sets, that are just completely different campaigns. And that's really the best way to look at it, where the base set is the overall context for a specific campaign, and then you can go and you can purchase the additional adventure decks, which are exactly those. Adventures in the context of the overall campaign. In this case, the campaign being Rise of the Rune Lords, which is really the reason that this is at number 1 for me, because I think that this is the most faithful recreation of the tabletop gaming experience. Because when you're talking about a tabletop game, you're talking about typically playing for months or even years at a time, you know, with weekly meetings, obviously. While this is on a much smaller time scale, you still have the same general idea and the same sort of movement with regard to your characters advancing, getting new things, new items, fighting new monsters, moving forward with the story, all that kind of stuff. Where you got the overall campaign and then the individual adventures within, which is something that I really enjoy. Unfortunately, I've only got a few of the adventures. I don't have a lot, and this is the only base set that I've got. I believe there are 3 total base sets now. I know for sure there's 2. There's the pirate-looking one. I want to say it's like Skull and Bones, something like that. But either way, I know for sure there's at least 2, and I believe that there are 3 of these base campaigns, so to speak. But that's really the reason for me that this is top on the list, is for the really, really faithful recreation of the tabletop gaming experience in this case, but also because of the fact that Pathfinder itself really started off as a game that was related to another game in a not so abstract way. But either way, Pathfinder, the adventure card game, is my #1 game that's about a game. So that's it for me, folks. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I know that it's something that's a little bit more abstract, and potentially you might think that it's too similar to the one where you talked about intellectual properties. And it's like, well, sure, there are certainly similarities, but again, this is all about context for me, and I hope that I distance these well enough. But just as a couple of side notes, there are lots of other games that did this that are actually very good games. So you've got, for example, Gears of War, as well as the Doom board game. You've got World of Warcraft. You've got Warhammer 40K. All of these kinds of things that started off as some other type of game and became a board game or a card game or some other kind of thing. And again, probably didn't need to do it, but I really like the fact that so many of these games really do faithfully recreate the experience of sitting either at the computer or at a console or at a table, you know, in the case of tabletop RPG, whatever it is. And I like that a lot of these board and card games really help you feel that same way. And the best ones add just a touch more and just make it that much better, which I think that the vast majority of the ones that I talked about do that. But with that, thank you so very much again for watching. As always, please put any and all feedback in the comments below. Your favorite games that fit this category. What games do you enjoy playing away from the table as well as at the table? Are you a person who loves Gears of War, the video game, and the board game? World of Warcraft, same thing. Do you agree with my choices? All of that kind of stuff. You guys know I love to hear from you. But with that, thank you so very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Thank you very much again for watching my top 5 favorite games that are based on other games. Do you have a personal favorite video game or card game or tabletop game or whatever it happens to be that got made into a board game? Please leave it in the comments below and let me know. As always, let me know what you think of this video. Check out some of my other playlists linked up at the top of the page. And if you want to see more of me in the future, please click on that big giant subscribe button. In addition, you can follow me on Twitter at DannyCGamingSci so that you can see when I post new videos as well as when I start live streaming video games. Thank you very much again for being here, and I will see you next time.